So we're here with Rinder, legal barrister, TV celebrity, chat show host, and his father David, who many people might not realise. David is a taxi driver of 45 years.
He's older than 45. Older than 45?
Slightly, yeah.
As was your father as well,
Yeah.
I believe.
As I always used to say, when people used to say to me, what do you do for a living? I run into my dad's business.
Nice.
I didn't. I did sort of. I've got a lot of opinions.
So we're here just to talk about the similarities between the two professions, between obviously the legal profession and the London taxi profession, and the undertaking and commitment that there is to become a legal barrister and obviously a London taxi driver.
Yep.
So, Rob, I don't know if you want to.
No, I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about this. I mean, you've got Judge Rinder Senior over here. I think the word profession is enormously important. We've talked a lot about how your profession has been denigrated, whereas people completely understand that I'm part of a profession because I, wear a wig from time to time and go and cross-examine people. People forget that yours is also a profession, and it's the strangest thing. I mean, it took me 6 or 7 years, didn't it, to become a barrister? Yeah. You had to do the equivalent of a university degree. How long was it? How long was the knowledge?
No, it was different when I did.
But now it's sort of 3-4 years?
It was about when I did it 2 years, I think.
Right, driving around on the moped.
On the moped, yeah.
And then you had to have an exam at the end of it.
And getting the points from Penton Street.
Right, but it's the equivalent, serious higher educational studies.
It's as hard as getting a degree.
Right, except people understand that about what I do. I'm governed by the Bar Council. Nobody can just rock up and decide, you know what I'm going to do? I've decided, I've got the wig, I've got the gown, I'm just going to go in court, I've got the wig, I've got the gown, I'm just going to go to court and represent you tomorrow. Whereas in your profession, as long as you've got sort of access to an app, a car, and the right amount of money to buy some insurance, and even then that's not guaranteed, you can call yourself a taxi driver.
It's just been so undermined, the trend. It's been quite depressing really the last couple of years. I mean, I've seen the trade in a year ago, or a little bit long, it's been turned upside down. And I don't know if we can do anything.
That's what we're here to do.
We're trying.
Yeah.
David, in terms of your training when you were training to become a London taxi driver and learning the knowledge, were you doing another job at the same time?
No, I was doing another job, yes. And then when I got into the threes, I then went full time.
Into the threes?
Threes is an appearance that you take every 3 weeks for your knowledge.
What do you mean you had to go in every 3 weeks to ask?
To answer questions, as the closer you get,
right,
it's the less time you go up there, isn't it? Really.
To get the points.
Yeah.
So you'd be grilled by people on your routes and on the history of London, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You say like it's obvious. Most people don't know.
No.
Don't get into an Uber or into a minicab and say, "Show me around London," or turn off your sat nav and get me home. You could do that.
Yeah.
And you could also give me a tour of London. You used to do it from time to time.
Yeah.
I know I used to be a child back in your cab in a coma. Right.
So in terms of learning the streets as well at the same time, and obviously the points of interest, has that significantly changed over the years? You've noticed?
When you say what actually changed?
In terms of the streets that you're going down, the places of interest, have you noticed significant changes too?
Oh yeah, they've built a whole new city out at Canary Wharf.
Yeah.
There's massive changes. I still think London is a wonderful city, beautiful. We're very lucky to live and work here, but we need something to come along for our trade and do so. I don't think Sadiq Khan is the answer.
No, definitely not.
No comment.
Not positive.
No, me.
But Rob,
Yeah.
in terms of your training when you trained
Yeah.
to become a barrister, were you just studying at university? Did you have a part-time job at the same time? Or
No, I was enormously privileged. I mean, it was last century. Can you believe it's that long ago? It's like 20 years ago. God, we're both getting older. Well, you know, maybe.
Come closer to the finish.
Oh, please. What happens at the end when you're finished? You give your sort of badge back to the sky. Imagine there's a celestial court. You have to do the knowledge in heaven, or wherever you end up, I suppose. I went to I did my first degree, which was politics and modern history, which is very much your thing, actually.
And I would never ever forget what your dissertation was about.
Yeah, okay, let's keep that to ourselves, shall we? It was at a different time.
Yeah.
I'll write about it one day. It was published. Yeah, and if you're really good at research, you'll probably find it online. And then I did a law conversion degree, and straight the way through to the bar. And was lucky, privileged to have, support from my mum and also from my dad, also from my grandparents, because you were very young.
I mean, my parents, bless them, are still both in their 90s,
right,
and pretty alert, and so they were very
right. I had two generations of taxi
support.
I'm talking over. Sorry, I had two generations of black taxi drivers supporting me through university.
Yeah.
So you and Papa.
Yeah.
Right. And so I went all the way through, and I was able to do that. Firstly, because I wasn't saddled, as people are nowadays, with crippling student debt. I left university with £1,000 worth of debt, which I thought I'd never pay back. Now, right, it was doable. The average debt that I see in my court, or I just am aware of, people coming to the bar, is something like between 30 and 80,000. I mean, you think about that in terms of social mobility. Conversation for another time. So I managed to get pupillage. I'd had a sort of good education and got a first and that sort of thing. People say that you and I have similar minds, certainly in terms of retaining knowledge.
I've got good general knowledge.
Now, you've got an amazing general knowledge. Nobody beats you. And also an interest in sort of random historical facts and things.
I love history.
Yeah, both of us do. So I went right the way through, and that's, I think, very difficult nowadays. But I was able to do that, and as I say, I arrived, and you're given all of the sort of happy professional vestiges of being a member of the bar, and being cloaked in all of the stuff that affords you. It changed. I arrived sort of in 2001, again in a sort of similar time of turbulence to when the profession was being affected by cuts in legal aid, etc. And I was lucky enough to be at a Chambers and then moved to another one, especially the one I'm in now, which navigated all of those kind of commercial problems. I call them commercial problems. What they ostensibly were was the removal of legal aid for ordinary citizens to have access to justice. But that wasn't necessarily an attack on the profession as such, although it's affected the profession. It wasn't as if all of a sudden what they did is, what we're going to do is we're going to lower your fees and allow anybody who doesn't have the relevant skill set or education simply to show up and be a barrister. They didn't flood the market with new barristers, they stopped funding it. Whereas what happened to your profession is they opened up the market unfairly.
Now, there's no one even going on the knowledge, as far as I'm aware. I don't know.
Well, that's one of the things that's come to light. Strangely enough, over the past few weeks, that obviously students coming into wishing to undertake the knowledge and do the commitment at the various knowledge schools, the numbers are significantly down.
Yes.
One of the things that obviously we wanted to touch on, because we as London Taxi PR put out a campaign last year with regards to the knowledge and trying to encourage students to undertake it and express the diversity and inclusion of the profession. So saying, we did it, so can you. This year we're going to put one out which is going to be another one, but from the student side of things. But obviously when you became a Taxi Driver Day, obviously undertaking the knowledge is, as you said, it sort of took
it was
2 years.
It took my life over.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to apparently, my wife used to tell me, you were calling, you know what calling over is?
Yeah.
Oh, what do you mean my mum?
Yeah.
There's been so many. What did she say you did?
She used to say to you, you're talking in your sleep,
Was
you're
it-
calling over.
You'd be sort of so I could have been conceived as you were in the middle of Manor House to Gibson Square.
Yeah, possibly.
It's true though, because it is, you know, my wife said exactly the same. That you'd be asleep and then all of a sudden, then all of a sudden you'd be, you'd start calling out left or right, you know.
But it is a major commitment,
It's
both
massive.
financially and time-wise.
And quite rightly, when you first go on the knowledge and you have to sign on, blah blah blah, and the guy and I remember this guy so well. His name was Mr. Miller. Ever remember him?
No, before my time, I'm afraid.
And you show him this film or something about it. He said, "There's 30 of you in this room. Only 2 of you will get a badge." And I thought, well, I'm not going to be out. I'm going to get the badge. And it was, I felt I had achieved something.
Yeah.
So it should be an achievement. It should be a profession. And there are other things I'd like to see done, but it ain't going to be as we're not considered to be top of the order, are we now?
No, I think one of the things that obviously that what we're talking about in terms of the knowledge is that obviously the numbers have really dwindled down, and obviously probably back, my father was a taxi driver as well, and he's just recently retired. He was 42 years of driving a taxi as well, but obviously then, when he did it, there was lots of people that were signing up to become a London taxi driver.
Yes.
And it was, it was a go-to job that was, that was seen, that was being, as being very, very well recognised and respected. Whereas, more recently, the numbers have dropped so much that, the rumours and the whisperings are coming that they, is it, coming to an end?
How can it be viable? I mean, I gave my cab back into. I didn't own a cab. I rented a cab.
Yeah.
And how can it be viable with what they want to charge for a cab nowadays to buy one? I mean, was it 70 grand or something?
Yeah, 65
We should
grand.
probably stay on the thing that I'm really interested in. I hope we can, in terms of PR, is that it's when you go around the world, it's really interesting about the responses to your profession. You go to America and you tell someone you're a lawyer, they sort of shrug their shoulders and roll their eyes because the profession there, well, let's face it, they don't have the best reputation. It's a joke. How many? What do you call it? 10,000 lawyers at the bottom of the sea. The answer is a star in America. Everyone's a lawyer in America. But it's an interesting thing, when you say your dad's a taxi driver, in other parts of the world, it is a job that doesn't necessarily have the same status and stuff. And when you explain to somebody that black taxi drivers that drive around London have the equivalent of a university degree,
They don't believe you.
right? It's exactly so. And I used to do this when I was young. You could pretty much give a pretty serious tour of London to anybody that you stopped. That actually, in terms of price point and stuff, if there's 4 of you going to Heathrow, it's pretty much cheaper, certainly, than the Heathrow Express.
Yeah.
All of that stuff, but above all else, the richness and depth of the profession, the quality of what you do, this university degree, the fact that it is a profession. People are, not just, I think in London as well, not generally aware of the knowledge anymore.
No, that's right.
Or of what the black taxi profession
No,
is.
you're 100% right. We were much more appreciated past times.
What do you think's happened?
I don't know. I mean, it's all about what's happening now is everywhere. It's about price conditioning.
Yeah.
Do you think it's just price conditioning?
I think that's one of them. I think that's one of them. reason.
I mean, it is surprising to me that I've said many times, here you are, it's not just a question of being a member of a profession, it's all that includes. So, as a member of the bar, I have to obviously be free of any previous convictions, I have to keep up my CPD, as it's called, continuing professional development, all of the stuff that you're required to do as a taxi driver. It's not just sort of it's not just a qualification that sits still. You have to keep learning
exactly.
stuff.
You've got all that little when they check your background.
Right. You've got a background check. I mean, these are.
And those are regular
Right.
as well. I think there is the, as you quite rightly pointed out, there is the lack of knowledge from the paying customer as to the depths of commitment and checks that you have to go through. And as you've quite rightly referred to, Rob, there is that element of respect in other countries for London taxi drivers being
especially
seen
North America.
as a profession,
Right.
Whereas over here, I don't know whether it's the amount of competition that there is, whether it's to do with new technology, the younger people sort of being more reliant on their phones.
I think that's part of
in
it.
some aspect.
There's two elements to that. I think the first one is the safety issue is really interesting. So I had a question the other day from somebody on Twitter about how she safely could get home, and my response very quickly was, you get in a black taxi. What prize safety? And the answer is probably about 20% more. But the answer is you are getting into a taxi not just with a licensed professional, but with somebody who is quite literally checked and governed by really serious disciplinary infrastructure. I mean, it's serious.
Well, I think also one of the big selling points is taxis, black cabs have been entrusted with people's young children, taking them around. And how better can that be? What a great thing that is for the.
You mean in what sense?
It's that they feel they can trust.
So you used to do hospital runs and that sort of thing. That's part of the
kids,
contract.
taking them backwards and forwards from school.
One thing I think that did change, which I used to annoy me a lot, we talked about this a lot,
With the
credit cards. I used to phone you up all the time. I'm in another cab with a sock over the over the machine, cash only. In fact, gradually, about a couple of years ago, I stopped using taxis where that was the case. I even got into one. It was a cash only governor. I said, all right, I'll see you later. And I think that is an issue, that it took perhaps a little bit too long for the profession to come into the 21st century. No, I know, and that's totally changed. And the apps that are available are also now really good. The other thing is small things, but they're safe with your kids. And I took the dog. I need to get the dog somewhere, and of course I could take my little dog in the cab. It's no problem. But that, I think, was an issue. There was I think the profession was a little bit Luddite, a little bit backwards. I understand why. It was a cash-only business. Not that you ever had any issues with the tax man, and no doubt you always paid your tax entirely properly and regularly and according to the precise amount of cash you received.
But there is that inclusivity and accessibility, openness to all.
In terms of the drivers?
Not only in terms of the drivers, but obviously in terms of the people, the customer.
Oh, that's a requirement.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine that. I mean, you're in a taxi where your badge, which, as you say, you're in a room of what, 40 to 50 people, only 2 of them got.
Yeah, well,
whatever it was.
That's what the carriage officer said.
Right.
Only 2 of you will get your lights.
And to keep that badge, you have to absolutely guarantee that you are going to treat every customer just as you are when you're a barrister. So, in fact, there's an interesting comparison. When you're a barrister, there's something called the Cabbie rule. In fact, it's the most important principle as a barrister, which means that you are not allowed to refuse a brief simply by virtue of somebody's politics or any other factor. It's called the Cabbie rule. Did you know that?
That's the same as you can't refuse a fare.
It's exactly the same, and it's still now the guiding and governing principle of the bar. You can get into serious trouble. You can get disbarred for doing that. So it didn't matter whatever my background is. You know, it's no secret of our background. I'm Jewish, etc. You know, I represented members of the British National Party who had strong anti-Semitic views. I wasn't their guru. It was cab rank rule. They got into my cab. I did my absolute best for them. Exactly the same, whatever ethnicity or sexuality.
It's everyone deserves a fair trial.
Right, and everyone deserves to get into a taxi safely, regardless of who they are.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've no doubt you had some strong opinions, but you kept yourself until you got home. I would have thought.
Yeah.
I think that's quite a key point as well, though. The fact that, you know, obviously, as we stressed just now about the inclusion, and that it's open to all in terms of doing the job, and it's and that there is no discrimination or anything in terms of like the passenger.
Sure.
The taxi's there because for everybody to get around, whether you've got a dog, whether you've got a cycle,
right.
whether you've got great big boxes or whatever. It's there because that person wants to use it, and there is no discrimination to it whatsoever, and it comes down to everybody's entitled to get their way across town.
And obviously, in particular, those people who have disabilities as well, being the only 100% fully wheelchair accessible vehicle.
And isn't that a requirement?
It's law. Yes, you have to have that.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I suppose there was a European law. I didn't know it covered black taxis.
Of course.
Because obviously one of the issues that we've got at the moment is the accessibility to the bus lanes, which is being denied in some areas and parts of London.
I didn't know that. I thought that there were ordinances which gave you automatic right to the bus lanes. Where does that change?
No, they're not all open to cabs. There are some of these lanes that are closed off.
I didn't know that. Which one? You'll know.
You can't use the one near where you live at the Angel, or you can up to a certain time. I'm right.
And these are coming in with regards to various
You're getting,
barriers.
sorry to jump in, but you're getting more and more. There was, as your dad's quite rightly saying, that there wasn't access to all bus lanes in London, but you're looking at probably about 90% of the bus lanes that we was always allowed to use.
Yes. And they're restricting them now.
But they're slowly restricting more and more and more.
But that's the point. You're happy to pay your extra cash because
if it gets you there quicker.
Well, it's not just a question of getting there quicker, which is absolutely critical.
It comes down to access.
Yeah, but it's also about what black taxis represent in terms of London's transport infrastructure. You've got a choice. You can go on an underground. You could use the train, a pretty good bus network. I've just been travelling around the world, and it's still the best London infrastructure, transport infrastructure. It's incredible, and taxis are included in that sort of conversation about getting to a place in London. That only works if they are able to do what the badge intended, which is to give them sort of access to the bus lanes.
Well, also it's a door-to-door public transportation service.
I agree. Yeah.
So
I agree, that's what it is.
by having the restrictions, whether it be road restrictions or whether it be access to bus lanes, it's actually stopping or preventing that door-to-door transportation for somebody who actually resides or wishes to travel into those affected areas.
But it's just yet more denigration of the profession as well.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, if you decide to get in a minicab, which for years
freedom of choice
existed, but it existed in sort of healthy competition because they didn't have access to a de facto, as legalese, but a meter on your mobile phone. How they lost that case, I don't know. They didn't instruct me, but they were. But that's the way it worked. But one of the differences was that you understood not just the other things we talked about in terms of safety and quality and the general knowledge, but also that you had an access to a part of the road, which once you'd made the choice to get into minicab, you didn't have.
You would have thought, with all the things that are in our favour, that are plus things, that we are so badly hampered especially by the police.
Oh, really?
The police, well, that's my opinion. Might not be.
Why did they not? I thought the police are fans.
I'll give you for an example. When I was last
I love the police. Go on.
I did a job to St Pancras, the Eurostar.
Right.
So we get there, and I'm helping the lady out with the bags, and a guy appears from nowhere. He says, "You wait there." I said, "You talking to me?" He said, "Yes." So he said, your insurance is damaged. The number, you know the thing." So I said, "Well, I'll go and get it changed." He said, "No, you've got to get off the road." And I thought, that is such bad PR from the police. To talk to somebody when such a
Slightly different issue though. I mean, they are. Do you think? I've heard this before. I used to represent the old taxi driver, as you know.
Yeah.
And certainly around the Charing Cross area, when it was easy pickings, they used to sort of go out and check for badges and that sort of thing. I don't know whether that's still the case. I mean, one thing that I do think I hear, certainly, is perhaps a legitimate complaint, is that you as professionals are low-hanging fruit. And I'm not sure whether, Uber drivers, for a variety of kind of complex reasons and sensitivities, whether they are as policed as your profession is. I don't know the answer to that, but I would be surprised if that were the case.
Interesting. But it's with regards to the roads, obviously in comparison to your profession, it's like you being in your office or your
Chambers,
your chambers, and not having all of the tools to be able to perform your job to the best of your ability.
Well, it's worse. It'd be worse because it would then. I mean, I also don't exist, like I say, against a backdrop of another market of unqualified people signing their barristers too. And perhaps what I need to persuade people to use my services are all the various things that I can give them that differentiate me from somebody that just literally got on the road without the relevant skill set behind them and expertise. And one of the things I could say is, if you're a taxi driver, look how I'm considered, and I'm part of London's transport infrastructure, I can use bus lanes, etc., etc. Or, I'm the only person, it used to be the case, I'm the only person that's allowed to speak in court at a certain level. Gradually, as they whittle away and erode the various things that you're able to do that, give the profession its critical commercial advantage, that's over.
So it's basically that they are taking what's that word I'm looking for?
It's usually a swear word.
No. Not in front of gentlemen.
No.
They're eroding standards.
Right. Well, and all of the tools that you need to make a case for why the black taxi profession has its status and deserves to continue to have that status.
Because as we previously referred to, it is a well-respected profession.
I'm not sure it is anymore. I mean, I think it should be.
Do you think that's
what I'm doing here?
Just in this country, or?
I think this country. We invented the Hackney carriage. It's been going. It's got a rich history. You read about it in novels. I mean, and beyond. It's 350 years. Or thereabouts. Isn't it something like that?
366.
366. If you just sort of think about that for a second, we're in 20. It goes back to the late the early 1700s. Cromwell, right? Okay. So in the interregnum period, before the Restoration, there were taxis driving around the Great Fire of London and around the time of the plague. It's impossible to think about that. I mean, it's just so interesting to think about that as part of the kind of the threads of fabric into London. It's just almost different profession. It's a different thing from, I think, the rest of the world. And it deserved and earned over that rich history of 3.5 centuries, close to that. It deserved to have that status, and people understood why it did. And so now, granted things change. I mean, you can't have chandlers anymore. They get overtaken by the fact electricity comes. But this is not about that. This is not about preventing another market.
You must have your bale of hay in there.
Right. You used to have there was always, a competitive market and a choice to be made, especially people coming from the suburbs into London, etc. But it was understood that in central London, this was something different and special, and sort of represented not just the best of London, but a real legitimate profession, I think it's fair to say. And I think nobody's anybody's trying to sort of crowd out or suffocate the other market. I think what you want is to be respected for the rich history, for what you bring as a profession, and why you deserve consequently not just to survive, but also flourish.
Well, how many trades, for example, would stop work for however many hours they would donate and drive underprivileged kids to on holidays to places like France?
Yeah.
I mean, it's wonderful, the charity work. They don't punch it.
The service veterans as well.
Yeah,
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, the amount of service that you just think about in 1 year over how many centuries you've done that. I think one of the issues that's really interesting to me, and we've talked about this as well, is that if you're a barrister, you're governed by the Bar Council. You've got your chambers representing you, and for a variety of reasons, you can be advocates, even though we're all self-employed, which is similar to you. We work under the auspices of chambers with a pretty sharp elbowed, as you can imagine, effective advocacy group on our behalf through the various organisations that govern the type of law you do, the Criminal Bar Association, the Bar Council, etc. One of the interesting things about the black taxi trade profession is that it's very fragmented in terms of your leadership. For a long period of time, I think what happened is that people were, black taxi drivers, well, I'm doing okay, it's not great, I don't think you've ever had a happy day at work. You've always been brassic, it's always quiet out, always quiet out. But even in let's say the richer years, or the less awful years,
the richer years were the 70s and 80s.
It's probably a good idea because the statute of limitations on them coming after your taxes run out. That's all right. But even the rich years, I do think, and I think this is an issue, something to be thought about, and why I think it's a real privilege to be part of this and part of London Taxi PR, is that now, as a profession, the groups of taxi drivers have understood or woken up, perhaps a little bit late in the game, but able to catch up, I'm sure, that you need a kind of coherent message to the general public. And a long period of time, you were reliant on kind of the carriage office and then eventually the mayoralty, and nobody was really interested. And there were different, you're a member, I think you're a member of a union for
I used to belong to the, what's it called?
TGW? Which one? Was it Bill Morris?
LTDA.
Right. And so you've got all these sort of organisations, none of which are particularly sort of effective advocacy groups.
No, they're not there for they remind me a lot of politicians that are only there for their vested interest.
Right.
That's one of the things. There has sadly been no real sort of unified voice, I think.
Well, it's a strange thing for me. If you're a profession that has the capacity and power to discipline drivers, to remove the green badge, that there doesn't be a single necessary organisation, but sort of an organisation that really vociferously, proudly and vocally represents the sort of professional interests of its drivers. It's one thing to discipline drivers, to set the relevant standards, but if you're going to pay into that, if that's going to govern the profession, it also needs to be a pretty powerful advocacy group. And where are they? There's all sorts of things going in London. You think, well, where are they when they prevent black taxi drivers from using bus lanes? Where are they as they, for example, put bumps in parts of London? You think, that aren't necessarily about traffic management, but definitely add to the overhaul charges of your vehicles. And where's the advocacy group that says, well, what we're going to do is we will reduce the overhaul fees for black taxi drivers? I mean, I have to say, as a pressure group governed by, as a pressure group, this professional organisation, if there is one, is pretty rubbish. So it's up to individual taxi drivers and organisations like London Taxi PR to be part of the conversation, to be shouting about what black taxi drivers do.
Well, we have, obviously, with regards to promoting the positive side of the profession, we try and put out as many regular campaigns informing the public of particularly the safety and the trust, respect element of the profession, as we've touched on with regards to the knowledge, trying to encourage more people and express and reveal the inclusivity, the openness of the profession, and the flexibility of it. The fact that it's a job you can do either full-time or
Yeah.
part-time.
It's been really interesting. There's a number, you've seen, we talked about this as well, there's a lot more, mums on the road who have done the knowledge recently.
Loads.
Yeah, and sort of it's changed from, the days in the 1970s you probably wouldn't know.
There is a fantastic diversity
Yeah.
in terms of not only sort of breaking down that barrier or the glass ceiling, if you like, but in terms of the ethnicity, the makeup, the genre, as we did with Peter Tatchell for the Pride seminar.
Sure.
So it shows the diverse makeup that there is now of London taxi drivers, and sort of dispelling that myth, if you like, of everybody's white, working class, male, so.
Do you have a cloth tax?
No, not anymore.
But I remember years ago when there was quite a few drivers to go out in a shirt and tie.
Yes, I would like to see that come back, or you have to wear more acceptable clothing.
Was that part of the deal?
No, they've never done it. You see, how can you give a job to a cab driver who's going into a multi-million building that's part of a big corporation, and they're coming in flip-flops? And it's very nice, but you can have a smart, like, PK shirt like you've got on. You don't need to look like a bloody tramp.
It's funny. It's one of the things that we actually discussed at one point, because we found out that Paul Smith actually undertook the knowledge and has got his own black taxi. And obviously, Paul Smith, the fashion designer, and we sort of thought, well, wouldn't it be great if he was to design a uniform and sort of have.
I think that's always been a very one of those taxi profession huge debates.
Right.
About the fact that obviously when you was doing the knowledge and you went up for your appearances, you had to wear a suit and a tie. And now obviously once you then get your badge and then once you're then out on the road, that everybody then dresses down and dresses casually how they want to dress. So there was always this debate about should there be some sort of uniform or should there be some sort of dress code? Yeah. And it's one of those arguments that will rumble on for years. But I think it would help to some sort of identity with regards to the black taxis as well. Yeah. But as I say, it's going to be one of those never-ending arguments.
Especially now with the emergence and uptake of the newer vehicles, as David, you correctly touched on, with regards to the expense that's involved in shelling out for one of these newer vehicles. As we've remarked to, friends of mine have remarked when they've got into one of the newer cabs, how smart and how different they look.
They're extraordinary.
Yeah.
It looks like a limo.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they are very nice, and they're very costly as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that that we've always had. People say that okay, we harped on it or touched on it earlier on about the late coming into the credit card market and accepting payments, but our taxis have always been at the at the forefront of all the innovations in terms of
the actual vehicles themselves.
The vehicles themselves have always changed and have always evolved. As we go back to everyone getting in a taxi that was obviously going on a horse and cart.
Right, but even now, it depends on what vehicle you're getting. I think it's because I'm a taxi driver's son that even now there's a part of me that feels a little bit guilty about paying by credit card. I think yourself, I know just a part of me. So, there's always the option for a tip. You always say, there's a conversation. I always say, I'm so sorry, I haven't got cash. It makes me want to apologise. But I do think, if there's one thing I was going to sort of contribute to the conversation, the ease of how that works, and it's very varied.
Yeah.
So, there are taxis that have got the technology there where you put your card, it's a touch read, sorted, no problem, done, takes 2
But
seconds.
you have to have that by law, I think.
Right, but there are still
Yeah.
vehicles where you get in and it's it's this sort of slightly kind of
And you won't get it.
it's not just that, it's a sort of slightly antediluvian dyspraxic process as the bloke gets out his card reader machine and pushes it through the back of the cab. And you're sat there for about 3 minutes of this sort of slightly embarrassing moment between the two of you. I'm so sorry. And there is that, and it does, I think, if you have these new vehicles, and you're right, they have been at the forefront of innovation. Also, now, environmental standards for London
Yeah.
as well have always been at the forefront
Now,
of that.
especially now we've got the electric one.
Electric vehicles, and in general, the removal of diesel vehicles, and they've always been part of that conversation. Not helped, by the way, I might add, by the humps in London, which actually add to that pollution. That's a conversation for another time. And actually, them not being able to be part of free moving and free flowing traffic in the bus lanes, again, causing more pollution. But I think that is an important thing about how now, especially younger users who just simply don't carry cash,
No.
about making that process sort of slightly more technologically easy to use. That's all I would.
Since Dave, your dad's right. Dave's right that since 2016 it's been compulsory that every taxi in London has to accept,
Yeah.
or
I
certainly
don't know
has,
how they
a
get
credit
round
card in the
that
back.
with the law, because I always thought that how can they enforce that if you don't want to pay by credit card?
Well, in the way that gradually, people just don't have cash. Let the market sort that out for itself. People, eventually you have to accept cards
Yeah,
because
I
the
think-
number of
I
jobs.
think it comes down to that, that word evolution as well. That,
Yeah,
that
right.
if you look at, completely across the board, that in any sort of retail environment,
Right.
and if you're providing a service, then a lot of people, yes, okay, if you're when it comes down to that word trade or profession is what we spoke about, is that you're gonna provide a service and that customer wants to use you, then you've got to be able to give them every possibility of every means of what they would need to pay by.
Now, my thing is, I guess I'd want to see the same approach, a uniform professional approach adopted by all taxi drivers, and that governed perhaps by the profession. Also, them to sort of cover the expense of that. So when you get into a black taxi, just as you know what the kind of, if you like, the interior looks like, for the sense of the tip-up seats and what, that sort of sense of
They
comfort.
do that in Australia, in certain cities in Australia. You can use credit cards and things like that, and the drivers have to wear a half decent.
No, I'm talking about something else. When you get into the back, that's part of it, to be sure you know what it looks like. But also that there's the sort of black taxi machine. You put the card in. There's 4 buttons for the amount of tip,
Right.
and it's a sort of easier, friendlier to use thing.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to engage in a sort of difficult choreography sometimes.
Yeah.
Even today, even last night, with the driver as he hands you the machine. I wonder whether that's just my feelings about it. I always feel guilty handing
When he
over the card.
hands you.
The machine, like they sometimes have great big card machines. If you're,
Oh right, yeah.
you're fine.
I think I would agree with you there in
Yeah,
terms of
just a small-
that there is still that that underlying problem that you're right. A lot of people do come up to it now, like to my window, and say like, do you accept cards?
You say you have to.
And at the end of the day, it's written all over the windows of the taxis anyway, and by law, we should do so. There is that.
It's just a machine in the back.
There is
I
that
really like
insecurity. There is that insecurity about the passenger,
Right.
whether they're going to get rejected or not, because
Sure.
and
That's
it
what-
does have
That
a big
is so
problem.
embarrassing. That
It is.
is really embarrassing.
Yeah.
I've had that a couple of times. They didn't have the right funds in there.
Mm.
Did you sling them out?
No, I didn't.
Did you-
Because
did you
what
sing
happened was
for
there
them?
were 2 girls,
Ah.
and I took it wasn't that far. I took them home, and the father came down and he gave me a few bob. He said,
No.
"But you couldn't. You felt."
You weren't entirely mercenary.
No.
Okay.
But just coming back to the younger elements, as Lee correctly said, one of the things that we have to seemingly continually remind people of is the fact that all major cards are accepted
Yeah.
by taxis. But also one of the campaigns that we did last year, which we actually won an award for, was All Hail the Street Hail, which again was reminding or trying to remind people exactly how easy it is to hail. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, why do you think, with regards to obviously particularly Uber,
Right.
where people are obviously using an app to hail a mini cab, why they're not just simply sticking their hand out when, you know, they're waiting for something to arrive, when half a dozen vehicles which could take them exactly the same, if not better, obviously, to where they need to go. Why they?
It's a difficult. I think the case hasn't been well made. Certainly in central London. So you're talking in Zone 1, the edges of Zone 2. You know, for me, it's an obvious case in those circumstances to take a black taxi. If there are 4 of you and you're splitting it, it's definitely cheaper, and you're going to get there quicker, and you're not reliant on someone using a sat nav. What's more, cabs can stop. There are more legal places for them to stop, etc. I mean, it's a no-brainer, for sure. But I don't think people understand that price point. I don't think that's been well sold. Your campaign is a really effective example of that. And also because there are other things which are, you know, ephemeral but nevertheless important. You know, if you've got your app, first of all, I mean, it's an effective app and it is a taxi meter. Just saying, not that the Court of Appeal were wrong, but it is. But there's another thing it gives you, right? So you've got a history of what cab you took, or what driver you use, a more accurate way of describing it. Small things. That means if I leave my phone in the back of that Uber, I immediately have got a record of where that person is, that person can get back to. I never keep a record of black taxi I'm in. Right, now that's why that app is really useful, because we've got an immediate connection. That's super important. And I left stuff I left a computer once in the back of the black taxi. That was the end of it. Not the bloke stuff. I'm sure it's sitting in lost property somewhere. But there is. Second thing is also get a financial record. It means I can go back into my history and see precisely what taxis I've used, and to that extent that's important for my accounts and for other people's accounts. That matters too. There's also a sense which it's become sort of price point and habit, it's a psychological relationship. You see the price and you see that it's sort of, you know, £6 to there, and then it's going to cost you 12 quid in the back of a black taxi. You're prepared to perhaps wait a few more minutes. And it's as simple as that, don't you think?
And then obviously there is the element that you can ask the driver when you get into a black cab roughly how much the fare will be. But coming back to what we've touched on before, there is that safety feeling and that respect that's been adhered and associated with London.
The safety is critical.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, I think I ended up getting in touch with you actually because I wrote a piece. I was with a friend, actually not in this country, in Spain. We just used a local taxi there. And as a matter of principle, not a matter of principle, matter of habit, or both habit and principle, I suppose, she's a very serious lawyer, by no stretch of imagination a pusher. And she's a member of, you know, the Takeovers panel. Pretty serious, sharp-elbowed type.
Right.
As soon as she got into the taxi in Spain, she opened up her Google app just to make sure that the taxi was going where it said it was going. Right. I fell asleep. I was knackered. I was as fast as it. That's absolute sort of practice for her. That's what she did. Right. And the reason for that is because after a period of years, and because as we know, the number of people that would never even jump the first hurdle to become black taxi drivers in terms of previous convictions, the number of sexual assaults, etc., that have taken place in unlicensed black taxis. And the reality is that that's the lived experience for a lot of people, especially women, using taxis on their own. That you have now this sort of technological capacity to check where you're going.
Well, that guy never gave out trade any
Well, let's not mention him. That's 1 in a million, you know. But we will cut that out, I'm sure, about war boys. And the reality is that, as appalling as that was, I mean, that was a shock to the entire trade. Everybody hung their heads in collective shame. And, also he was it was so unusual.
Yes, it was.
And that was the thing. You felt a sort of collective sense of shame.
You felt embarrassed embarrassed.
right, not just embarrassed, it was an affront to the profession in a way where, you know, there were regular cases, albeit not necessarily investigated, as if you've described before, the same degree of investment and commitment when it comes to the lower hanging fruit. The reality is there are huge numbers of people who are on the road now who are uninsured, never meaningfully stopped, who would not pass, I suspect, I don't know, who would not pass, you know, a basic background check, who consequently have criminal convictions, etc. And the reality is, if you're a woman on your own, when I was asked this literally the other night, if you got into black taxi, would I be concerned if you were asleep or drunk? Obviously, there's a fee if you're vomiting. I mean, absolutely not, because there's this sort of overriding, guiding, ethical governance and principle and sense of pride in the job for the last 350 years, where it's sort of understood
We
that
don't
you are
do
safe.
that. We don't behave like
Right.
that.
I think that comes down to the, you know, as we're coming back to right to the very beginning again, when we talk about like the training
Yeah.
and you know what it is that you have to go through whilst you're doing your appearances and while you're doing the knowledge. Is it's not just about your topographical testing; it's about your character testing.
Right.
It's about, you know, your dad probably experienced it as well as what I did. Is that, you know, you are challenged by the examiner as well to, you know, how you're going to react to things, and, you know, whether you're questioned or whether you're, you know, whether they're abusive to you and stuff. So it's, you know, one of the, you know, you're not allowed to get into the back of a taxi with a
Well, that's one thing you don't do.
you're not allowed to get into the back of a taxi with a passenger. So you know, that's one of the things that, you know, that is instilled into you when you are doing the knowledge and when you are doing your training.